The man who called after his funeral. 3 days after Elliot Mercer was buried, his widow received a phone call from him. The call came at 2:17 in the morning. Nora Mercer did not answer. Since the fire, sleep came only in short, medicated stretches. At dawn, she saw one missed call on the screen. Elliot. She told herself someone had found his phone or copied the number. Then she listened to the voicemail. Nora, listen carefully. It's me. I wasn't in the house. There was a sound behind his voice, a low metallic rhythm, followed by the distant cry of a train horn. Don't trust the police. The green file. Tell Walter Hayes. Please, Nora, tell. The message ended with a sharp scrape and a breath that did not sound like fear until she listened to it a second time. By 7:30 that morning, Nora Mercer was standing on Walter Hayes's porch in the rain. At 69, Walter slept lightly. He was making coffee when Nora's car stopped at the curb. She crossed the yard without an umbrella, dark coat open, hair wet against her face. He knew Elliot Mercer. Everyone in Greyford did. Mercer was a polished attorney who could make a jury doubt the weather while rain struck the courthouse windows. 6 nights earlier, firefighters had found a body in his burned river house. Dental records, a wedding ring, and an engraved watch had identified it as Elliot. The funeral had been held on Monday. Walter stepped aside. Come in. At the kitchen table, Walter listened 3 times, first to the words, then to the pauses, then to the sounds behind them. The voice was weak, but the cadence, the clipped way Elliot said Nora's name, and the pause before police all belonged to him. Walter placed the phone on the table. When did you last see him alive? Thursday evening. He said he was going to the river house to work. Was that unusual? No. He went there when he wanted quiet. Was he frightened? Nora looked down at her hands. Her wedding ring remained on her finger. For the last 2 weeks, yes. He checked the locks twice every night. He stopped parking in the garage because he said someone could trap him inside. I asked what was wrong. He said it was a client matter. Did he mention a green file? No. Did he ever speak about me? Only once. Years ago, after you testified in the Halpern case. He said you were the most irritating, honest man he had ever met. That sounds like Elliot. Nora did not smile. Walter played the message again. Beneath Elliot's voice, the metal sound repeated in groups of 3. Not machinery exactly. Something loose striking something fixed. Then the train horn, long and low. Why didn't you take this to Sheriff Cole? Walter asked. Because Elliot said not to trust the police. He also said to tell me. Yes. Which means either he trusted me, or he wanted you to trust no one else. Nora's face tightened. Do you think it's real? Walter looked at the rain sliding down the window over her shoulder. I think the message is real. I don't yet know what that means. Sheriff Daniel Cole arrived 20 minutes later. He listened to the voicemail in Walter's kitchen, standing with one hand on the back of a chair. Daniel was 52, broad-shouldered, patient, and far less offended by doubt than most men who wore a badge. He had been sheriff for 11 years and had known Walter for most of them. When the recording ended, Daniel rubbed his jaw. The phone was never recovered from the fire, he said. Was the number disconnected? Walter asked. No. Nora kept the account active in case we needed records. Can you locate the call? I can request the tower data. It'll take time. Request it quietly. Daniel glanced at Nora. You believe someone in my department is involved? I believe Elliot believed that. He was a defense attorney. Distrusting police was practically a business expense. Walter leaned back in his chair. Then let's prove him wrong. By 9:40, they were driving toward Millstone Road. The Mercer River House stood on a narrow rise above the Blackwater, 3 miles south of town. It had once been a cedar hunting cabin. Elliot had renovated it into a modern retreat of glass, stone, and dark wood, the sort of place magazines described as rustic after removing everything rustic from it. The fire had hollowed out the center of the building. Part of the roof had collapsed over the study where the body had been found. Yellow tape hung wet and heavy between 2 blackened trees. Deputy Owen Rusk was waiting beside the county cruiser. Rusk was 41, tall, clean-cut, and careful about his appearance. His uniform looked newly pressed despite the weather. Walter remembered him as a patrolman with quick eyes and an instinct for saying exactly what superiors wanted to hear. "Sheriff," Rusk said. Then he looked at Walter. "Didn't realize we were reopening the scene." "We're reviewing it," Daniel replied. "Because of the phone call?" Walter watched him. Daniel's expression changed only slightly. "What phone call?" Rusk paused. "The widow called dispatch this morning. Said something about Mercer's number." Nora had not called dispatch. Daniel said nothing. Neither did Walter. Rusk looked toward the house. "I may have heard it from county records, news travels. Especially before it starts," Walter said. Inside, the air still smelled of wet ash and burned insulation. Their boots sank into soot mixed with rainwater. The study was a rectangle of blackened beams and fallen plaster. A metal desk had collapsed in the heat. Along the far wall stood the twisted remains of a gun safe. "The body was here," Daniel said, pointing near the desk. "Face down. The medical examiner found blunt trauma to the back of the skull, but the fire damage made it impossible to determine whether it happened before or during the collapse." "Accelerant?" "Gasoline along the baseboards. Kitchen window broken from the outside. Fire investigator believed someone threw an ignited container through it, which made this look like murder." "It was murder," Rusk said. Walter crouched near the desk. The floorboards were burned through in places, but a section beside the safe showed a pale rectangular outline under the soot, as though something metal had protected it from the first wave of heat and had been removed later. "What sat here?" Walter asked. Daniel bent closer. Evidence team didn't list anything. Rusk shrugged. "Could have been part of the safe." Walter touched the edge of the outline. The soot had been disturbed after the fire. A thumb-width streak ran toward the doorway. "Who entered first?" "Firefighters," Rusk said. "Then me. You removed anything?" "No." Daniel looked at him. "Who logged the personal effects?" "I did. Ring on the left hand, watch on the right wrist, wallet in the jacket. Mercer's license was damaged but readable." Walter stood. A dead man in his own house, wearing his own ring, his own watch, and carrying his own license. Rusk gave a faint smile. Sometimes the obvious answer is the right one. Sometimes, Walter said. The obvious answer is the one someone packed for you. They left the house shortly before noon. In the car, Daniel waited until the river house disappeared behind the trees. Nora never called dispatch, he said. No. I checked. Then Rusk knew about the call another way. Daniel's hands tightened on the steering wheel. He was first deputy on scene. He also transported the dental records from Dr. Voss to the medical examiner. Walter turned toward him. Why didn't the dentist send them directly? Her office scanner was down. Rusk was already nearby. Convenient. Daniel looked straight ahead. I've known Owen 12 years. That doesn't make him guilty. No, it just makes this worse. They went next to Mercer and Shaw, attorneys at law, a brick building across from the old courthouse. Martin Shaw, Elliot's partner of 17 years, received them in a glass-walled conference room. He listened to the voicemail once and quietly confirmed the voice. When Walter mentioned the green file, Shaw explained that Elliot used green folders for trust accounts and settlements. The archive index showed one such file removed the afternoon before the fire under Elliot's initials. In Elliot's desk, Walter found a brass key stamped 317. Then Shaw admitted what he had withheld from his first statement. The state bar had announced an audit, and nearly $1,480,000 was missing from the firm's client trust account. Only Shaw and Elliot had access. Did you take it? Walter asked. No. Did Elliot? Shaw looked toward the door. 2 days before the fire, he told me none of it would matter by Friday. He said, by Friday, I'll be dead. I thought he was being dramatic. The brass key opened a locker at Greyford Central Station. Locker 317 contained a green file, an envelope of cash, a prepaid phone, and a photograph of Deputy Owen Rusk standing beside Elliot Mercer in the parking lot of a bank in Kansas City. The photograph had been taken from a distance. On the back, in Elliot's handwriting, were 4 words. He knows where it went. The green file held copies of wire transfers from the Mercer and Shaw Trust account to 3 shell companies. One was registered to a vacant lot in Nevada. Another belonged to a dead man in Arkansas. The third was called Rusk Property Services. It had received $210,000 over 8 months. Daniel stared at the page. Owen owns no company. On paper, his brother does. Walter said. Rusk's brother, Eli, had died 6 years earlier. The prepaid phone had one number in its call history. It belonged to a motel on Highway 6. The Gray Lantern motel manager remembered Elliot renting room 9 in cash for a man who signed in as Caleb Dunn. The room still held a pharmacy receipt in Dunn's name, an unused bus ticket to St. Louis, and a torn Mercer and Shaw envelope. Dunn was a sick, homeless former client of Elliot's. His sister had not heard from him in 8 days. Before disappearing, he told her a lawyer had hired him to drive a black Jaguar and keep quiet. Elliot's Jaguar had later been found abandoned near the river house. Dr. Miriam Voss then examined the dental identification. Her signature had been copied, and the report omitted a ceramic implant she had placed in Elliot's upper jaw. The medical examiner confirmed the burned body had no such implant. The dead man was not Elliot Mercer. If the voicemail was genuine, Elliot had survived his own funeral. Daniel ordered the case sealed before the news could leave the medical examiner's office. For the next hour, only 4 people knew that the man buried beneath Elliot Mercer's name was someone else. Walter, Daniel, Dr. Voss, and the medical examiner. Owen Rusk was not one of them. They met in Daniel's office after dark. Rain pressed against the windows, and the courthouse clock across the street had just struck 7. Daniel placed the green file on his desk. If Elliot stole the money, he needed a way to disappear before the audit, he said. Caleb Dunn gave him a body. Rusk gave him a clean scene and a false identification. Walter nodded. Caleb was promised a job, cash, and a bus ticket. He was probably told to drive Elliot's car so witnesses would see it away from the river house. Then someone killed him. Or he died before the plan was finished. The medical examiner found a skull fracture, which may have happened before the fire. Daniel looked at the photograph of Rusk and Elliot outside the Kansas City bank. Why would Elliot call Nora after getting away? Because the arrangement changed. Rusk betrayed him. Most likely. Daniel stood and walked to the window. If Owen helped fake the death, he knew Elliot was alive. If Elliot called Nora because he was afraid, Owen may already have found him. Walter played the voicemail again. The metallic strike came 3 times. A pause. 3 times again. The train horn followed, then Elliot's whisper. There were 2 rail lines through Greyford. The northern passenger line crossed downtown and past the old grain mill. The eastern freight line ran behind the abandoned stockyards and split near Blackwater Quarry. Passenger trains no longer sounded their horns inside the quiet zone downtown. Freight trains still did at East Junction. Daniel pulled the night schedule. A southbound freight had crossed East Junction at 2:14 in the morning, 3 minutes before Nora received the call. The crossing stood less than half a mile from the old signal depot, an empty brick building owned by the county. Owen Rusk had been assigned to patrol the Eastern District that night. They drove there without lights or sirens. The depot sat between the tracks and a field of waist-high weeds. Its windows were boarded, and the roof sagged over the rear wall. Freight cars stood motionless on a side track, wet steel reflecting the sweep of distant signal lamps. The metal rhythm from the voicemail became clear before Walter reached the building. A loose warning plate hung from a post beside the crossing. Each gust of wind struck it 3 times against the iron bracket. Clang, clang, clang. Silence. Clang, clang, clang. Inside the depot, Daniel's flashlight found a stained mattress, empty food cans, and fresh footprints in the dust. Someone had stayed there recently. On the floor near the back door, Walter found a dark mark no larger than a coin. Daniel tested it with a field kit. Blood. Beside it lay a broken piece of mother of pearl, curved and polished. Walter had seen its twin that morning in the framed photograph on Nora Mercer's mantel. Elliot wore white mother-of-pearl cufflinks at their anniversary dinner. Daniel searched the room while Walter stood near the back door. The weeds outside had been flattened by tires. In the mud, half protected by the building's overhang, was the impression of a heavy boot and a narrow triangular cut in the heel. County deputies wore department-issued boots. Rusk wore his own. Walter had noticed the damaged heel at the river house. Daniel found a disposable syringe beneath a cabinet. It contained no liquid, but a pharmacy label remained attached to the plastic sleeve. Midazolam, a sedative often used before medical procedures. Elliot was here, Daniel said. Rusk found him. Maybe. You still need more? I need enough that a defense attorney cannot do to this case what Elliot Mercer did for a living. They left the depot and drove to the sheriff's office. Rusk returned from patrol shortly before 10. Daniel confronted him with the Kansas City photograph and the payments to his dead brother's company. Rusk called them off-duty security work. "Where were you last night at 2:17? Daniel asked. "Patrolling East County." "Near the freight depot?" "I passed it." "Did you see Elliot Mercer?" Rusk laughed. "Elliot Mercer is dead." Walter watched him. They had never said otherwise, yet Rusk defended the official identification instead of reacting to the impossible question. He also repeated that dispatch had told him about Nora's call, although dispatch had no record of it. Daniel suspended him for concealing a financial relationship with a subject in an active investigation. Rusk placed his badge, weapon, and phone on the desk. "You always did like making innocent men nervous, Hayes." "No," Walter said. "Guilty men do that themselves." Rusk left through the rear entrance. A plainclothes deputy followed him home and watched the driveway. At 12:46, Nora called Walter and whispered that someone was outside her house. A patrol arrived within minutes. The intruder had forced a kitchen window and searched only Elliot's office before fleeing. Behind a broken wedding photograph, Walter found a memory card containing forged bank records and 7 audio files. Elliot and Rusk discussed the bar audit, the false dental identification, and a man Rusk could provide because nobody would look for him. "You said Dunn wouldn't be hurt," Elliot said in one recording. "He was already dying," Rusk replied. "You paid for a solution, not a sermon." In another, Rusk warned, "After the funeral, there are no partners, only loose ends." The final file ended with Elliot's voice. "If you're hearing this, Owen has decided I'm one of them." He added that the original ledger was hidden somewhere Rusk could not retrieve without exposing himself. At 2 a.m, Daniel received a call from the deputy watching Rusk's house. Rusk's car was still in the driveway. Rusk was not inside. He had slipped through the rear woods while the deputy watched the driveway. The break-in at Nora's house had been a search for the ledger. By sunrise, Daniel had issued a county-wide alert. Rusk's photograph went to state police, transit officers, and neighboring departments. His bank accounts were frozen. His home was searched. They found cash, 3 passports under false names, and a locked case containing evidence bags from old investigations. They did not find Elliot Mercer's phone. They did not find Elliot Mercer. Walter returned to the river house alone that morning. He walked through the burned study and stopped at the pale rectangle beside the safe. Something had rested there during the early fire and been removed after the flames were extinguished. Not part of the safe. A portable document box. The streak in the soot led toward the rear doorway, where Rusk had carried it out. Walter looked at the blackened remains of Elliot's desk. A lawyer planning his own death would keep 2 kinds of records: the ones he needed after disappearing, and the ones he needed if his partner betrayed him. The green file had been in the station locker. The memory card had been behind Nora's photograph. The original ledger had been in the metal box at the river house. Rusk had taken it from the scene. So why was he still searching? Because the box had not contained the ledger. Walter drove to Mercer and Shaw. Martin Shaw was already there, standing in Elliot's office with a cardboard archive box on the desk. "I heard about Rusk," he said. "The courthouse is full of rumors." Walter closed the door. "Elliot told you he would be dead by Friday." "Yes." "You believed he meant suicide?" "I didn't know what he meant." "You knew about the missing money?" "Yes." "You also knew the bar audit would uncover it." Shaw's face became guarded. "What are you asking?" "Did Elliot leave you anything?" "No." Walter walked to the bookshelf. Legal volumes filled the top shelves. The lower shelf held bound annual account ledgers, each labeled by year. 1 year was missing. "Where is last year's ledger?" Walter asked. "At storage." "Which storage?" Shaw did not answer. Walter turned. Rusk broke into Nora's house because he thought Elliot left the ledger there. He searched the river house after the fire. He searched Elliot's office before the funeral. But he never searched your home, did he? Shaw's jaw tightened. "You think I have it. I think Elliot gave it to the one person who would understand its value and hate him enough not to destroy it." For several seconds, Shaw said nothing. Then he unlocked the bottom drawer of his own desk and removed a red leather book. "He gave it to me the morning of the fire," he said. "He told me if he failed to return by Monday, I should take it to the state bar." "Why didn't you?" "Because he was dead. Because the ledger proved he stole from our clients. Because my name was on the firm." "Your name is still on the firm." Shaw lowered his eyes. "I needed time." Walter opened the book. Every illegal transfer was recorded by date, amount, destination, and authorization code. Besides several payments to Rusk Property Services, Elliot had written 2 letters. BQ. "Blackwater Quarry," Walter said. Shaw looked up. "How do you know?" "The freight depot is less than 2 miles from it. Rusk sedated Elliot there. He needed somewhere isolated to finish what he started." Daniel met Walter at the quarry road with 6 deputies and a state police unit. Blackwater Quarry had closed 9 years earlier after groundwater flooded the eastern pit. The county used part of the property for gravel storage, but the lower roads were blocked by rusted gates and concrete barriers. Rusk's missing department access key opened the north gate. Tire tracks led down the service road. Near the flooded pit, they found marks where a vehicle had stopped and turned. In the gravel lay a strip of gray fabric caught on a broken length of wire. Nora had described the coat Elliot wore when he left for the river house. Daniel brought in divers. They entered the water shortly after noon. At 1:17, a diver surfaced and raised one arm. Elliot Mercer was found inside his own black travel case, weighted with 2 sections of chain. His hands had been bound. There was a puncture wound in his left arm and a single gunshot wound beneath his ribs. The medical examiner estimated he had died between 2:30 and 4 in the morning, less than 2 hours after calling Nora. The man who called after his funeral had been alive, but not for long. They found Rusk that evening because Walter understood what frightened him. It was not arrest. It was the ledger. The money could be traced. The recordings could prove conspiracy. The false dental record could prove the staged death. But the red ledger connected every act in one continuous line, from stolen client funds to Caleb Dunn's death and Elliot's murder. Rusk could flee Greyford without his clothes, without his car, even without his money. He could not flee while the ledger existed. Daniel allowed a single piece of false information to leave the sheriff's office. Martin Shaw was transferring the original ledger to a secure evidence room at 8 that night. The statement was mentioned over an unencrypted department radio channel Rusk knew how to monitor. At 7:45, the courthouse annex went dark. A maintenance door opened on the east side of the building. A man wearing a utility jacket entered the basement and moved toward the evidence stairwell. Walter waited in the records room with the lights off. The door opened slowly. Rusk stepped inside carrying a pistol fitted with a suppressor. He closed the door behind him. "Where is it?" he asked. Walter sat at the far end of the table. "You always enter public buildings with a gun when you're looking for paperwork?" Rusk aimed at him. "You should have stayed retired." "I tried." "The ledger." "It isn't here." Rusk's mouth tightened. "You lied over the radio." "Yes." "You think Cole's men can reach this room before I pull the trigger?" "No." That answer unsettled him. Walter looked at the pistol. "You killed Caleb Dunn because he saw your face. He was dying anyway. You struck him at the motel, dressed him in Elliot's clothes, and carried him to the river house." Rusk said nothing. "You altered the dental record and logged the ring, watch, and wallet yourself. Elliot thought you were helping him disappear. He didn't know you had already moved the money. He knew enough. He recorded you." Rusk's eyes narrowed. That was his mistake. He made several. The biggest was calling his wife. Walter kept his voice calm. "No, the biggest was believing a man like you could be satisfied with half." Rusk took one step closer. "You don't know what happened at the depot. You found him using the prepaid phone records. You sedated him, but he ran before the drug fully took effect. He reached the crossing and called Nora. You caught him by the back door. His cufflink broke when he fought you. Then you drove him to the quarry." "He begged," Rusk said. The word came out almost casually. Walter heard movement beyond the wall. Daniel was in the adjacent archive room, listening through the old ventilation grate. Every word was being recorded. "Did Caleb beg?" Walter asked. Rusk smiled without warmth. "Caleb never woke up." That was enough. Daniel opened the side door with his weapon drawn. "Drop it, Owen." Rusk turned toward the voice. Walter moved at the same moment, pushing the heavy records cart into Rusk's legs. The suppressed shot struck the ceiling. Daniel crossed the room before Rusk could recover and drove him against the table. 2 deputies entered behind him. The gun slid across the floor and stopped near Walter's shoe. Rusk lay face down, one arm twisted behind his back as Daniel secured the cuffs. "You set me up," Rusk said. Daniel pulled him to his feet. "No," Walter replied. "We gave you a door. You chose to walk through it." Owen Rusk was charged with the murders of Caleb Dunn and Elliot Mercer, conspiracy, evidence tampering, fraud, theft, and attempted murder. The recordings, the financial ledger, the false dental documents, the blood at the freight depot, and the recovery of Elliot's phone from a hidden compartment in Rusk's basement left little room for doubt. Martin Shaw surrendered the remaining firm records and cooperated with the state bar. He was not charged in the murders, but he lost his license for concealing the stolen funds after Elliot's death. The trust account recovered less than half of what had been taken. The rest had moved through accounts Rusk could no longer access and might never be found. DNA confirmed that the burned man was Caleb Dunn. He was exhumed from Elliot Mercer's grave. His sister came to Greyford to identify the few personal effects that had survived the fire. She chose a simple service at the county cemetery. 6 people attended. Walter stood at the back beneath an old maple tree. Nora Mercer came alone. After the service, she remained beside the grave while the others left. "He used Caleb because he thought no one would notice him," she said. Walter looked at the fresh earth. "Yes. And in the end, Caleb is the reason we know what happened. He gave the lie a name. Lies become harder to protect once that happens." Nora held Elliot's wedding ring in her palm. The evidence unit had returned it after confirming it had been planted on Caleb's hand. "I don't know where to bury this," she said. "You don't have to bury it anywhere." "I loved him." Walter nodded. "I know. I keep thinking that if he had come home instead of making that plan, I would have helped him. He could have confessed. He could have gone to prison. At least he would have been alive." Elliot spent his life convincing people there was always another exit. When he finally needed one, he chose the door that looked easiest. Nora closed her fingers around the ring. He sounded afraid on the message. He was. Was he trying to save me or himself? Walter considered the question. Probably both. She looked at him. "That isn't a very comforting answer." "No," Walter said. "But it may be the honest one." Elliot Mercer was buried 2 weeks later under his real name. There was no large funeral, no courthouse speeches, no polished walnut coffin surrounded by clients and judges. Nora arranged a private burial and did not publish the time. Walter did not attend. That night, he sat in his kitchen while rain moved across Greyford in long, quiet bands. Nora had allowed him to keep a copy of the voicemail until the trial. He played it once more. "Nora, listen carefully. It's me. I wasn't in the house. Don't trust the police. The green file. Tell Walter Hayes. Please, Nora, tell." Then the scrape, the broken breath, the empty end of the recording. For days, people in Greyford spoke of the impossible call from a dead man. Some said Elliot had predicted his murder. Others said guilt had brought him back long enough to expose the truth. By the end of the month, the story had already begun changing into something cleaner and stranger than what had happened. But there had been no ghost. Only a frightened man who had arranged his own funeral, watched the town mourn him, and discovered too late that pretending to be dead did not protect him from the living. Walter deleted the recording from his phone after the trial ended. He did not need to hear it again. The dead rarely called from beyond the grave. But sometimes, just before the darkness reached them, they found one last person willing to listen.